It was a mystery in southwest Minnesota for 41 years. Who was the man murdered and dumped in a culvert near Beaver Creek? This week, authorities announced a surprising identification.
By breathing new life into cases that had otherwise gone cold, genetic genealogy testing has changed the game when it comes to solving cold cases. For investigators, solving John and Jane Doe cases had been like trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. But now advancements in DNA testing are giving investigators the edge needed to solve the cases once deemed impossible to crack. These victims, who for decades had remained nameless and unknown, are now finally getting their names back. Hi friends, and welcome back to Mysterious Hook. Today we will be looking at two cases in which genetic genealogy has finally solved the mystery and brought some degree of closure to both investigators and families alike. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and click on the notification bell to get the latest true crime stories straight to your inbox. Without further ado, let's dive in. Our first case today takes us to Rock County, a county in the southwestern corner of the state of Minnesota. Although Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes, Rock County is one of the 4 countries that does not have a natural lake. On March 13, 1981, while on a routine city cleanup, a Department of Transport worker was busy clearing out the concrete culverts along Interstate 90 off Highway 23 in Beaver Creek Township. As he raked away the debris, he was shocked when he came across some skeletal remains. The worker immediately contacted his supervisor, who called the police. When police arrived, the area was sealed off and all present were questioned regarding the discovery. The supervisor explained that the culverts were cleared out annually and the last cleanup occurred on October 21, 1980. Investigators surmised that the body may have been dumped in the culvert any time between October 1980 and 1981. Forensic technicians and crime scene investigators removed the body and worked to collect any possible clues that may have been left behind. The body was transported to Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office. Identifying the John Doe proved to be a difficult task for the medical examiner. The body had been badly decomposed and was barely recognizable. From what remained of the near-complete skeleton, the coroner determined the John Doe to be a white male between the ages of 30 to 50 years old. His estimated height was between 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. There was no way to determine weight, hair, or eye color, given the condition of the body, nor were there any distinguishing birthmarks or tattoos. The cause of death was listed as a homicide, with the coroner remarking that there was a possibility the victim had been shot. There had been a wound to the skull that was consistent with a small caliber gun, but no gun or shell casing was found in the area. Plaster casts of his teeth were taken for dental record purposes, and DNA samples were extracted from the remains. Getting fingerprints had proved impossible, as his fingertips had disintegrated with decomposition. The victim was found clothed in green cotton work pants, a leather belt, and boxer shorts. He wore either light tan or white slip-on engineer boots size 8 to 9 and 2 pairs of green socks on each foot. In his possession was a black plastic comb and a locket with a baby's picture on the inside. Using this vague description, investigators began an extensive search on the area, questioning the workers from the Department of Transport who had worked the area since the previous October. A rough sketch was developed by a police artist, along with details provided by the medical examiner. Posters were made and circulated in and around Beaver Creek Township. They also questioned motorists who used the road frequently about any unusual activity in the area. Locals to the area were questioned regarding the John Doe, who was found in the culvert, but no one seemed to recall anyone fitting his description. A search of missing persons databases in and around Minnesota yielded no results, and it seemed as if no one knew who this man could be. A lack of leads ultimately led to the case growing cold. No one had come forward to report anyone missing in the area. Although police periodically looked over the file, nothing new came of the information. As technology advanced, DNA profiles of known criminals were becoming digitized in order to allow law enforcement to have quicker and easier access to records. A profile had been developed of the Rock County John Doe back in 1981 and was used to search for him on national criminal databases. However, this too proved futile, as there was no records of the victim found. The case lay cold for decades without any new information. In 2018, genetic genealogy began changing the face of criminal investigations. Having used this new technology to track down and capture the infamous Golden State Killer, other law enforcement agencies soon took notice. This technology, they believed, would surely be a game changer in identifying unsolved cold cases. The Rock County Sheriff's Office partnered with the nonprofit agency, the Doe Network, in August 2022 and reopened the Rock County John Doe case. They developed a digital composite sketch from the autopsy photos of the John Doe that was uploaded to their site and all other missing person databases. The next task was to raise enough funds to pay for DNA testing. Through community initiatives and fundraisers, the sheriff's office were able to reach their target and pay for all the tests needed to perform the task. Working with the genealogy websites, volunteers from the Doe Network used the DNA samples provided by the sheriff's office to start tracing familial connections. After a few months of pouring through thousands of family trees, they were able to find a familial mat in Omaha, Nebraska. The team then made contact with the woman who said she didn't know of any relative who had lived in Rock County or went missing, but was willing to meet with them. After contacting agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and investigators from the Rock County Sheriff's Office, officials made their way to Omaha in early November 2022. In Omaha, investigators met with the members of the Gattiano family and the woman who was the closest match to John Doe's profile. The family members volunteered their DNA for testing. On December 20th, 2022, investigators discovered that two of the profiles matched the strongest against their John Doe's profile. They returned to Omaha with the results and met with the woman who uploaded her profile to the genealogy website, along with her aunt and uncle. During interviews with the family, detectives discovered that the woman's aunt actually had a brother who had gone missing in 1971 named Louis Anthony Gattiano. When they showed investigators a picture of Louise, they knew they had found their John Doe. The family could not provide much information about Louise's life, as many of their family members had since passed. Louise would have been born sometime in 1946. What they did reveal to investigators was that Louise had been a notorious bank robber in the 1960s. According to his family and archived news articles, Louise had first been accused of robbing a bank in his hometown of Omaha. He was eventually caught while trying to rob a First National City Bank in New York on January 25, 1966 for $96,400. When he was 20 years old. According to reports, Louise was overpowered by the bank teller and ended up shooting the counter instead. He had injured his hand in the scuffle. The article states that Louise told detectives he had been desperate and depressed and wanted his life to be over. Louise was charged with attempted robbery, felonious assault, and weapons possession. Since then, family members heard from him infrequently, but all communication had ceased from 1971. He was not reported missing at the time because he had a strained relationship with his family. They were just as baffled to hear he had been murdered 10 years after losing contact with his family. No one had ever come forward looking for Louise since he had been missing. For investigators, half the battle has been won, as they know their John Doe's identity. Rock County Sheriff Evan Verbrugge said the moment was bittersweet. While it's not news anyone wants, Louise Gattiano's family, at long last, has some answers. And while there's still much more to be learned about Mr. Gattiano's death, knowing his identity, even decades after he died, is a critically important new clue in this case, he said. Verbrugge said the case will remain open. Despite the uphill challenge, it's going to be difficult for us to find out, but our job is to try and get answers, and the cost is minimal, he said. Authorities urge anyone who may have known Louis Anthony Gattiano between 1971 and 1981 or has any other information about the case to come forward and contact the Rock County Sheriff's Office. Numbers will be made available in the description box below. Our next case takes us to Rock County, Wisconsin. It is a country of open spaces and parks and offers anyone a chance to enjoy the great outdoors and a chance to reconnect with nature. But for 27 years, a mystery baffled law enforcement officials until new DNA testing brought some much-needed answers. On November 11, 1995, in a wooded area near Bradford, Wisconsin, a group of hunters were tracking down a herd of deer. Gary Gilbank wanted to share with his nephews his passion for hunting, unaware that he was about to show them a sight from a horror movie instead. As they reached the southern bank of the Turtle Creek, they stopped short. On the ground lay the skeletal remains of a man. It baffled them. They owned the very land the skeleton lay on, and none of them knew who it belonged to or how it came to be here. Without hesitation, they contacted the police. Investigators arrived and immediately cordoned off the scene to begin their investigation. He appeared to be laying on his belly with his hands over his head. His head and back were partially covered by a denim jacket, and he had been wearing a t-shirt with the name of the British band Venom on it and a plaid shirt. He also wore gray camouflage pants, and there was one Nike sneaker next to the body. The other was not found. Investigators collected a chrome pendant of a horned goat, a Budweiser lighter, an Aquatech wristwatch, and a tube of Carmex lip balm from the scene. The remains were removed and transported to the coroner's office for further examination. The coroner began an extensive examination of John Doe. There had been no signs of trauma visible on the remains. His height was estimated to be between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches, with his weight at 140 pounds. His estimated age was between 17 to 20 years old. Using a dental analysis, the coroner determined that he had been a Caucasian male. He had received good dental care with only 2 fillings. He still had his wisdom teeth intact, with 2 having partially erupted and 1 being impacted. Samples of hair were taken for a toxicology analysis. There was no trace of cocaine, codeine, or morphine, which ruled out the possibility of an overdose due to long-term opioid addiction. But the coroner did not rule out that he may have been intoxicated or had taken hallucinogenic drugs prior to his death. His cause of death was not determined, but it was possible that he had died from hypothermia after falling into the creek. The coroner believed that it was possible he may have been intoxicated and become disoriented before deciding to lay down and had died as a result of exposure to the elements. There had also been speculation as to his exact time of death. The coroner estimated that he may have died around fall or winter of 1994. Investigators had no leads apart from the clues they found on the John Doe at the scene. They launched a full-on investigation that led them down several paths. In the meanwhile, John Doe's skull was cremated, and the ashes together with his remains were buried at the Johnsontown Center Cemetery used to bury John and Jane Does. Working on the theory that he may have been intoxicated and disoriented, investigators searched all known accidents that occurred around the estimated time of John Doe's death. They believed he may have been the survivor of a car wreck and had wandered off after the accident. However, no reports were made of a missing man fitting his description. In fact, there had been no missing persons reports made of any man fitting John Doe's description. Investigators then revisited all rock concerts that were held in the area based on the clothes he was wearing at the time he was found. People from within the heavy metal community were interviewed, but no one remembered anyone who fit John Doe's description. They had reached another dead end here. Given his estimated age, they searched through school yearbooks and government records, but found none of the teenagers in that time period were reported missing. Interviews with the students from the local school district provided no leads either, leading investigators back to square one. The investigation then turned to several witness statements about a man that was dubbed River Guy by the locals. According to witnesses on October 16, 1994, at around 5:30 p.m., a young man in his early 20s was seen running toward the creek where the body was eventually discovered. Witnesses alleged that the River Guy was wearing clothes similar to the John Doe and had been intoxicated and distraught that afternoon. Statements made by these witnesses include that the man had been stumbling along toward the creek and had fallen several times into the water as he tried to climb the embankment. They also alleged he had yelled at bystanders to get away from him, and he mentioned being wronged by a woman named Mary and being a fugitive. The theory remained one of the strongest until later forensic tests proved that River Guy and John Doe may not have been the same person due to time discrepancies. According to later forensic estimations, the John Doe's rate of decomposition showed that he may have died around May 1995 and not in October 1994 when River Guy was last seen. This also dispelled the initial estimated time of death given by the original medical examiner. The next lead came in the form of a pendant found at the scene. In 2010, detectives from the Rock County Sheriff's Office traced the pendant back to a Janesville area craftsman. The man had been active in the local metal rock scene and had crafted several rock and metal-inspired pieces for fans. When shown the pendant, he told police that it was indeed one of his pieces. However, he made several similar pendants and over the years had sold them to dozens of people. When shown a composite sketch of John Clinton Doe, the craftsman was unable to recognize him as a possible customer. This caused yet another hurdle in the investigation. In 2014, the Rock County Sheriff's Office teamed up with the Smithsonian Institution scientists to perform an isotopic analysis of the John Doe's bones. Isotopic analysis has been used in forensic anthropology to determine the region of origin of unidentified human remains. From bone tissue, forensic scientists can determine the region of birth of a person. The Smithsonian scientists discovered that John Doe had spent a significant amount of time in the Midwestern area around the Great Lakes. These areas included the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan. This information allowed investigators to narrow down the field of investigation. Having identified the John Doe's possible birth area, investigators went back to the drawing board in 2016 and reworked the composite sketches developed by the Rock County Sheriff's Department and the FBI in 2013 and 2014, respectively. This time they regressed the sketch to age 16 and added some color before distributing it to the public. Private investigator Jack Fries said that the department hoped it would refresh the memory of anyone who may have interacted with him that year. The whole idea here is to get people to think about what was going on in the early 90s and in their lives, and do they have any connection with this guy at all, he said. Their attempts had failed, but investigators were not to give up so easily. For the next 2 years, private investigator Jack Fries continued to work finding a way to identify the young John Doe. In June 2018, Fries, together with Detective Corrine Billhorn, reached out to the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit volunteer-based group that helps with identifying unsolved John and Jane Doe cases. Using the DNA extracted and preserved from the original autopsy, the team set out to find the identity of the John Doe. In partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Flugent Genetics, Aerodyne Research Inc., and Full Genome Corporation, the long journey began. Using genetic genealogy and ancestry website GED Match, the research team were able to locate and find possible relatives of John Clinton Doe in February 2019. They had a tentative identity, but investigators needed to be 100% sure. Over the next 3 years, investigators worked with the University of North Texas as they tracked down relatives of the John Doe. Upon interviewing with the relatives, they discovered that 2 of the volunteers may share a half-sibling relationship with the John Doe through their father. Country officials applied for and received a warrant to exhume the body of the potential father in late 2021. Once DNA was extracted, testing once again began in earnest, and they finally announced the identity of John Clinton Doe. On June 14, 2020, Rock County Sheriff's Office announced that Carl Isaacs Jr., age 20, was identified as the body in the creek. Carl was born on April 30th, 1974, in Delavan, Wisconsin. His parents divorced when he was very young, and it seemed that he had never quite recovered from the trauma. Carl had attended an alternative high school for Badger, Delavan, Darien, and Elkhorn area high school students. In 1991, at age 17, Carl had developed a substance addiction. He had also joined a group of friends who engineered a crime spree, resulting in damage to property and multiple burglaries. In March 1992, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for burglary and vandalism of golf carts at the Delbrook Golf Course in Delavan. Between April of 1992 and fall of 1993, Carl was sent to 3 different prisons, finally settling at the Oak Hill Correctional Institute in Oregon, Wisconsin. While there, he had been released to undergo a substance abuse recovery program at a halfway house in Madison. He was also occasionally allowed to return to his mother's home under house arrest. Carl sometimes played the role of informant to authorities in drug-related cases. In April 1995, he had been on one of his house arrest visits. On April 16, 1995, he had suddenly disappeared. He was never heard from or seen again. A county judge immediately signed an arrest warrant for Carl for probation violation that had been renewed annually until April 2018. Investigator Jack Fries pointed out that no one had really come forward reporting Carl Isaacs as missing during the time he disappeared, which complicated their investigation. In this case, Mom and Dad were divorced. He was kind of living with his mom, although I don't think he stayed there very often. He was kind of on the streets, basically homeless. I don't think he had a friend, nobody at all, who would have missed him to the point where they tried to find him, he said. Fries believed that something drove Carl to break the rules of his probation and leave his house. During the announcement of the identity of Carl Isaacs Jr. at the press conference held on June 14, 2022, Rock County Sheriff Troy Knudsen said that it was a sad moment, but also a resolution to a decades-long mystery. "I'm kinda sad to have to get together and discuss the untimely death of a young individual in our community, but I'm glad to finally be able to bring a little bit of resolution to the individual's identity. Knudsen declined answering any questions as to why family never reported him missing or any details about them. He did, however, indicate that the family had been bracing for the news following the discovery of the DNA matches and the investigation. Instead, he reminded all those present that the case was still ongoing. We're really looking to flesh out exactly who he was and how he found himself in that particular location. That's where we're looking to the community to help provide some of those details for us, he said. Knudsen added that the investigation was a lengthy process, but with the help of technological advancements, it made the identification possible. He thanked and credited Jack Freeze, who was a former employee of the Rock County Coroner's Office, who assisted voluntarily on the case. He also thanked the DNA Doe Project, which provided police with investigative breakthrough that helped identify Carl Isaacs. Nick Gilbank, who was the man that discovered Carl's body, still remembers the moment he found the body in the creek. I walked over to see what I was looking at, and there next to a garbage bag of his belongings was a clothed skeleton. I remember kneeling down and picking up the shirt, and there was a skull, completely decomposed. Although he still has some questions, he is glad that there is some kind of closure in knowing John Doe's identity. I guess I'm glad they finally identified the remains, he said.